Hello and welcome to the 25th Vermont Grazing and Livestock Conference. I would like to take a moment to thank our sponsors. I would like to thank the National Grazing Lands Coalition, Food Animal Concerns Trust, Morrison's Custom Feeds, Rural Vermont, and the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. I would also like to thank our partners. I would like to thank the United States Department of Agriculture, National Institute of Food and Agriculture, and the National Resources Conservation Service. I would also like to thank Cedar Tree Foundation and the Forrest C. and Francis H. Latner Foundation. Thank you for joining us for the 25th Grazing and Livestock Conference. The conference is brought to you by the University of Vermont Extension Center for Sustainable Agriculture and the Vermont Grass Farmers Association. Enjoy the content.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kimberly Hagan from the Center for Sustainable Agriculture at UVM Extension, and I would like to introduce Rick Kersbergen here. And he's going to talk about how to use your forage analysis results. Rick is an extension professor with the University of Maine Cooperative Extension, and his primary focus for the last 20 years has been sustainable dairy and forage systems. Rick is a certified crop advisor with the American Society of Agronomy and collaborates with numerous organizations, including the Maine Grass Farmers Association Network in the Maine Organic Milk Producers and the Maine Dairy Industry Association and other producers and commodity groups. Rick is also currently serving as the educational coordinator for the Dairy Grazing Apprenticeship Program in Maine and is an instructor for NRCS, the NEDC Pasture Ecology 2 class. And I just want to say this presentation, it's as someone who also works in the grazing network world, these are some of the top questions we are always being asked, and it's great to see all this put together in one place. So there you have it. And Rick, there we go. Thanks.
Great. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. Hopefully everybody can see that and hear me. If that's give me a thumbs up. Great. Sounds good. So thank you, Kimberly, for that introduction. And I do want to say that a lot of my examples, as Kimberly says, I do a lot of work with dairy farmers. So a lot of my examples are going to be dairy related, but I've hopefully included some other livestock in here for examples to use as well, because I'm sure we have a variety of livestock producers on this conference. So just to give you, if I could just get my slides to advance, that would be great. There we go. So what is forage quality? So, you know, I'm going to talk a variety of components of forage quality, and some of you may or may not have done a forage analysis, and you get a whole page full of numbers and what do they really mean. And we could spend a long time going through each of those components that get analyzed for a forage analysis, but I'm going to really just try and stick with what I think are the most important things, or the things that I look at first when someone sends me a forage analysis to look at, and how that's going to relate to what kind of livestock they're feeding and how that livestock's going to be used, that feed, and what's the best use of that feed. So what's good forage? You know, we always look at the two big things. How much energy does it have? What's the crude protein? And everybody looks at those numbers immediately. That energy value could be a variety of things. It could be something that some people use TDN, total digestible nutrients, as an energy value. And there's a net energy system for dairy and other livestock as well. And we'll look at those real briefly. I also, when we're going to talk about forage analysis, we usually talk about stored forages. I'm going to talk a little bit about pasture as well. But the thing that I really want to emphasize in this talk is to look at it, forage analysis, in a different way, and look at it in terms of what's the intake potential. And the reason I do that is, you know, and we can get into some of that as well in a second, but I just want to throw these resources up here. This bulletin on the lower right-hand corner is one that you can download, Understanding Forage Quality. It's an old publication, but it's great in terms of simplifying all the terms that you would see on a forage analysis. But so really what I want to gain out of this session, for you to gain, is an understanding of how forages impact an animal's ability to utilize the feed. And really, how do we maximize how much forage an animal can eat? Because, you know, we're in the Northeast, and cool season forages make up the basis of our forage-based livestock production. And really, when you look at it in terms of animals, the more forage an animal can eat, probably the better their production status is going to be. And really matching up the quality of the feed you have to nutrient needs of that productive animal. And also trying to figure out, you know, if you've got stored forages, how do you prioritize those stored forages and feed them at the appropriate times and understand what the value of those nutrients mean to that animal. But maximizing intake is one that you're going to hear over and over again during this presentation. And how do we maximize that intake? So just some basic principles that I'm sure almost everybody is aware of is that, you know, as a plant goes from a vegetative state to a reproductive state, the yield goes up. So the taller the plant, and whether you're grazing or harvesting that feed, the taller the plant, the more harvestable yield there is. But realize as that plant matures, as it goes vegetative to reproductive, that the quality in terms of the nutrient value of that feed to the animal is declining. So that's always just the balance. We're trying to figure out what's the balance between yield and quality. With grazing, obviously the animals harvesting that feed, you're not spending a lot of money having those animals feed off that pasture. Whereas if you're harvesting that feed for stored forages, that may shift that curve a little bit to the right because there's some economic cost to harvesting that feed as a stored feed. Whereas that economic cost for a grazing animal is little to none. So let's look at those plants real quick. Okay, so a young plant, and basically you look at a plant cell on the top, you've got the cell contents that you see in yellow and the cell wall, which is in the green color. And realize that a young plant, that the cell contents makes up about 80% of that cell, and the cell wall may be only 20%. And that cell contents is something that's completely digestible to the animal. So that's highly nutritious components of that plant in that cell contents, whereas the cell wall is partially digestible. As that plant gets older, it needs more structure, so the cell wall itself becomes a greater part of that cell wall, and we have less in terms of cell contents. So the cell contents may only make up 20% and the cell wall 80%. So again, the cell wall is partially digestible by ruminants. So basically the quality as the plant goes from vegetative to reproductive and taller and older is going to decline. And we look at that in terms of actually what's component of the cell wall. So again, in a young plant, it's only a small proportion of the plant cell that's part of the cell wall. And it makes up about 40% cellulose, 50% hemicellulose, and 10% lignin. So cellulose and hemicellulose are partially digestible by a rumen animal. So they can use the microflora in their rumen. The microflora will digest those and produce volatile fatty acids that the animal can use as an energy source. An older plant has much more lignin as compared to cellulose and hemicellulose. And lignin is completely indigestible. So not only do we have more cell wall, the cell wall itself becomes less digestible. So it's a double impact in terms of increasing maturity with decreasing forage quality. So here's a slide, and again, I kind of stole this from Sid Bosworth, and I've used it many times. But again, it looks at that plant cell, and the cell contents, almost 100% digestible. A lot of protein, a lot of soluble carbohydrates in there. And then the cell wall. And some of the terms I want you to understand as we go through this talk is that cell wall, cellulose and hemicellulose in that cell wall comprise what we call as ADF, which is acid detergent fiber. And that's going to vary in digestibility. Over time, it's going to change a little bit. The proportion of cellulose to hemicellulose is going to change. But basically, acid detergent fiber is the cellulose and hemicellulose component of that plant cell wall. If we add lignin to that component, so cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin, that's what we would call the neutral detergent fiber. So when you look on your forage analysis, you'll see acid detergent fiber and neutral detergent fiber. Acid detergent fiber actually is something that we kind of use as a predictor of the energy. And NDF, the neutral detergent fiber, is something that we look at as a predictor of the animal's ability to consume that feed. So dry matter intake, the intake potential is directly related to that neutral detergent fiber, how much hemicellulose, cellulose, and lignin. and ADF corresponds with the energy value of that feed. So again, just to recap, a young plant, vegetative plant, is high in protein, low in fiber, high in digestible energy. So the NDF value is relatively low, ADF value is relatively low, and the protein is relatively high. An older mature plant, just the reverse. It's lower in protein, higher in fiber, so higher in ADF and NDF, and lower in energy potential. So I'm going to really focus in on this dry matter intake and how that relates to forage quality and forage analysis. And so you're going to hear me talk about it all the time. And really, it just comes down to this. Animals that have high intakes make more milk. Beef cattle that consume more forage can gain more weight. So we really need to say, what can we do to maximize the intake of that feed for our livestock? The more they eat, the higher their productive status is going to be. And here's just some numbers to throw in there for dairy. Again, I apologize, a lot of my examples are dairy, but for every pound an animal can eat in dry matter intake, a dairy cow is going to gain about 2 pounds extra milk, especially for cows in early lactation or peak lactation. And so same true, you're going to find that animals that consume more forage are going to be able to produce more meat or milk. So realize, we have some good prediction equations on what intake should be for animals. Intake's going to be related to size of the animal, the stage of production status. So animals that are in a higher stage of either milk production or growing or, trying to finish animals, they're going to have higher intake production status. They're going to have an ability to eat more feed. Body condition, stage of pregnancy, all factor into how much an animal can eat. And realize that, we're filling this animal's rumen with feed. And so if we fill that animal's rumen with feed, we reach a limit in terms of bulk fill. How much can you stuff into that 55-gallon barrel that we call a rumen in a cow? How much physical fiber can go in there? So realize if we have forages that have higher digestibility of the fiber, that also have less total fiber, they can probably eat more. And the digestibility of that fiber is going to impact how quickly it's going to leave the rumen, meaning that cow can eat more feed again once it starts leaving the rumen. So most of the time in our situations, we always deals with the physical or bulk fill of the rumen. If you're feeding a dairy cow, high level of production, lots of grain in that diet, there's some other factors that influence that intake. But most of the time, with forage diets, we're looking at how much fiber can we get into that animal and digestible fiber, and that's going to really impact the production ability of that animal. So when we look at feed factors and pasture factors, and I'm going to talk about pasture first, it's important to realize that pasture quality relates to that NDF factor that we talked about, neutral detergent fiber, but not just the amount of fiber, but the digestibility of that fiber. The higher digestibility, the higher the passage rate of the feed and higher intake potential. And we have to think about what limits an animal's ability on pasture to consume digestible feed. Some of that's going to be pasture availability, sward density, how dense is that pasture, and how much time they have for grazing. And supplemental feed will play into that, but let's just stick with the fact that we're going to look at sward density and pasture availability. So when we look at factors that influence how much an animal can eat on pasture, it's related to how much time they are grazing. On the average, it's going to be about 12 hours a day. How many bites per minute can they take? So a biting rate is about 65 bites per minute for a dairy cow. And then what's the bite size? And that's really related to how dense is that sward? How much can that animal get per bite? And this is really where your management comes in. This is more set as a factor, where bite size, meaning how much can that animal eat per bite, relates to how good is that pasture. How much are they consuming with each bite? How dense is that sward? So, a lot of people have always asked me, is it worth taking a pasture sample for quality? Because pastures are going to change. You're going to rotate your pastures. Each paddock may be a little different. Is it worthwhile to actually do a forage analysis on a pasture? And, there's some claims yes and no, and then we're going to talk about that, but realize that, that pasture quality is going to change. It could change over the course of a day. You know, plants produce more sugars during the day and then they respire some of those sugars at night. So pasture quality actually goes up in the afternoon. So what's the value of actually sampling for quality in a pasture? Well, there is a value, and I'm going to get to it, but realize that how do we take that sample? Because cows are out there just grazing what they like to eat. The top of the plant, the bottom of the plant, the middle of the plant, you know, plants that they find more desirable, more palatable. So how do we actually take a sample? How do we know what the cows are eating? So I've done a lot of pasture research, and we try and figure out this question. And most of the time, pasture researchers are going to say, well, we're going to clip everything at a standard height and take that as our sample. Well, I'm not sure that's the good way to do that for a farmer. I think most farmers should go out there and watch their cows eat, see what they're eating, and try and take samples that are similar to what the cows are actually eating. So there's lots of concerns and questions about sampling, but that's one of them. So if you're going to do this, go out and randomly graze a paddock. Go out there, watch them eat, try and mimic what they're consuming. You know, plastic bag, freeze it, and then mail it off for analysis. And again, most labs are going to be either going to Dairy One in New York or Cumberland Valley. All the labs that are out there that are certified doing forage analysis would want to see a sample that's probably coming to them frozen or was frozen before it gets mailed. When you do the analysis, the analysis down here, NIR, is near infrared reflectance. And if you want to do that, that's probably the cheapest way to get a forage analysis. If you're concerned about the mineral content and want a very good, accurate mineral analysis, you're going to have to ask for what's called wet chemistry for minerals. But the NIR analysis is usually basic enough for most everybody to use for ration balancing. How often should you sample? So again, you know, pastures, different paddocks, different fields, it's going to change quite a bit. And it's a whole different situation as compared to stored feeds. So what I think is really important is the fact that people start getting some of this data as a baseline, because really what you're trying to do is improve your pastures over time. So you want to figure out, are your forage quality samples increasing as you increase the management of your pastures, increase the fertility, whether you improve forage species, does it make a difference? And this gives you just management decisions. It helps you build a database of information to improve your forage quality over time in that pastures. But what I think is important is down here at the bottom. It's not just quality you want to measure. You want to know yield, because it really depends, again, on that sward density. How much are they getting per bite? That's what's critical in terms of producing a pasture that's going to provide nutrients and provide your animals with good quality or good ability to produce milk or meat on a very efficient manner. So how do you measure yield? Again, another challenge, and a lot of people have done this a variety of different ways. It's hard to actually measure dry matter intake on a pasture. You know, if you're feeding a cow in a barn, you know how much you put in front, you know how much is left over, you can do it. In the pasture, it's a little different. So a lot of people use pasture sticks or do pre and post measurements by actually clipping and figuring out dry matter intake that way. So pasture sticks, I'm sure everybody or a lot of you have seen these. You can get heights of different grazes, and then if you stick that pasture stick through the sward and look at the number of dots, you can get some calculations. If you don't have one of these, I'm sure some of the extension and NRCS offices throughout the state can help you, and I have quite a supply of them as well. But that's one way to get an estimate of the actual yield in those pastures. The other way that we do a lot of times is do pre and post grazing measurements using a quadrat. We'll stick a quadrat, we'll try and clip the whole sward, you know, maybe 4 inches off the ground, get a weight on that. And then you can use this calculation if you want to for pre and post grazing. Use a 1.92 foot square quadrat, clip the forage within that, dry those samples. Again, you have to make sure they're relatively dry or air dry. And then just weigh those samples before and after grazing and multiply by 50 to get you pounds of dry matter per acre of forage intake. So pre-grazing, post-grazing, gives you some idea of what the potential is out there for feed. So here's some analysis. This is a really old study. Actually, this is a study done in the late 90s down at Wolf's Neck Farm with some beef cows, where we did some fairly intense sampling of pastures. And you can see that over time, and there's May through August, you know, protein levels are going to vary depending on when the animals are going into those paddocks and what the vegetative state of the paddocks are. TDN is a measurement we have on a forage sample. It's an old measurement of energy, total digestible nutrients. And it's a really good standard measurement. There's been some challenges to that in terms of the accuracy. But when we look at it over time, TDN is still a really good way to look at forage energy and decide what's a good quality feed. So here we have a relatively high crude protein, a relatively high energy value. And that's changed over time. As we got into July, energy values declined a little bit, but then came back up later in August. NDF, again, the component of the feed that really relates to the ability of that animal to consume feed, so intake potential, neutral detergent fiber, and ADF, which is another term that's going to correlate a lot of times with the energy value. It doesn't necessarily in this sample. When you see NEM and NEG, that's another energy measurement that we use, a calculated value that we look at to try and figure out, what's the energy potential. It's maybe a little bit more accurate than the TDN, but it's another way to measure. This is net energy of maintenance and net energy of gain. And we measure them differently in a sense because animal uses that feed energy at different levels of efficiency for maintenance as compared to gain. So it's more efficient to use it for maintenance than it is for gain. So I hope I haven't discouraged everybody from taking a forage analysis from a pasture, but I do think it's good ways to monitor progress as you improve your pastures over time. So I'm going to talk a little bit about stored forages because it's a little bit easier with a stored forage because you can sample and you can measure intake and other parameters of your feeding system a little bit easier. Here's just a link if you're interested in how to take a forage sample. It's just a YouTube video we put together a few years ago. So one of the things I keep talking about is this NDF and its ability to be used as a predictor for intake. And one of the things I want to say that is now on forage analysis, we do measure digestible NDF. How much of that cell wall neutral detergent fiber is actually digestible? And what's really interesting is that, that neutral detergent value goes up as that plant matures, but the amount of digestible NDF kind of hits a peak pretty early and then actually goes down slightly. And the amount of indigestible NDF continues to rise as that plant matures. So really, the NDF value does predict somewhat intake, but what's really important is what's the digestible component of that. And really that meets a peak early in terms of cool season forages in the Northeast towards the end of May. So if you're harvesting feed for feeding your animals during the winter, it's really important to get that digestible energy value figured out and try and harvest that feed earlier and earlier to try and get that digestible energy as a component of your stored feed. And, we've got some really good equations. So for 1 unit change of NDF digestibility, we can get half a pound increase in milk per day, which is pretty significant. And here's just another graph showing the same thing. But what's interesting here is 3 different cuttings. So the NDF digestibility declines very dramatically in that first cutting of hay. So it's really critical to try and get that first cutting of hay. Whereas the second and third cuttings, the NDF digestibility doesn't change over time all that much. The NDF itself, again, just kind of mirrors the digestibility. It goes up very quickly. And then second and third cuttings, not all that important. And then we're all pretty familiar with the fact that crude protein declines pretty rapidly with each level of maturity for first, second, and third cuttings. And here again, just some more examples in terms of, what the digestibility, this NDF digestibility value on your forage analysis is going to tell you. So here's an NDF of 40 and ADF of 30, but the energy value is so much different because of the fact that the NDF digestibility is so different between these 2 forages. So if that NDF digestibility value goes up, you can see that the energy value goes up as well. And as well goes up the intake potential of that feed. Here's just the same example. So this really looks at that intake. So normally we would predict intake based on NDF, and we would say that this animal, whatever this animal is, that 2.78% of that animal's body weight would be dry matter intake. What's the intake potential? 2.78% of her body weight. However, if you have a feed that has a higher digestibility, the intake potential is going to be so much higher. Again, same ADF and NDF values, same ADF and NDF values, but the digestibility difference is huge and the intake potential is huge. Again, same thing, but what I want to show here is this isn't normally seen on a forage analysis. And basically, it's basically the kinetics related to the digestibility of that fiber. And so if the NDF digestibility keeps going up, the passage rate through that animal is going to go up, and she's going to derive, or he's going to derive, more energy from that feed, have a higher intake potential. You can feed that animal more forage, and they're going to produce more milk and meat for you. So forage testing, and again, you can go to different labs. Dairy One is one that gets used quite a bit in New York. Cumberland Valley is one that a lot of grain support people use, and I've used them regionally for some research values. And then if you have horses, the Equa Analytical Lab in New York is also a good resource. Make sure when you're taking a sample, just like some of you may have been in the soil sampling talk just prior to this, make sure you get a good sample that represents what you're going to be feeding the animals. Use a hay core sampler for drilling into square bales. If you're drilling into round bales, same thing. But try and get a representative sample. Take multiple samples, combine them, take a subsample of that to send to the lab. You're going to get this back, and I've made it blurry on purpose because I don't want to go through all these values, but I want to point out, and we will on the last slide, some real important things that you want to look at, and what I look at when I first get a soil sample, or a forage sample, excuse me. And each of the labs, whether it's Dairy One or Cumberland Valley, have these on their website in terms of going through each one of those components that's measured in the forage sample. So you've taken your forage sample, you're going to get it back. Now you're going to say, well, what feeds do I want to use for what animals at what productive status? And really, that's what I want to go through in a little exercise here and see how this works. I haven't tried this before, so this will be an experiment. But realize that every animal is going to have a different need in terms of what their energy and protein needs are. So lactating animals need high energy, high protein. Ewes that are three months away from lambing or are maintenance, they probably don't need much protein, don't need much energy. Brood cows don't need much energy, don't need much for maintenance. Finishing animals, on the other hand, do need fair amount of energy, but they don't need much protein. So we need to look at what does the analysis tell us, and how do we choose what's good or bad for the animals and their productive status. So here we go. Realize again, this is just beef cows. We've got different phases of that beef cow life cycle, whether they need high energy for early lactation when that calf is first born and she's nursing that calf, versus mid gestation where she has the lowest energy requirements and a relatively low protein requirement as well. So understanding that, and you can look up these energy requirements, or I'd be glad to reference some of those for you at some point later on if you want to get a hold of me. But here's the table that would just do some of that. And really, depending on how much you want them to gain. So if you've got a steer you want that animal to gain 2.5 pounds, and some of you may be going to some of the beef finishing talks later on, and you're going to try and get that on grass-fed animals. You're going to try and get that 2+ pounds. How much energy do they need in TDN or megacals of energy, and how much protein? This is percentage. But you can figure that out based on their dry matter intake as well. So here's an example. So I'm just going to try and be as basic as I can in this example. We'll see how it goes. But here's forage A, B, and C. All right. So if you were looking at this, what's the best forage here? So a lot of you are probably going to say, well, it's forage A. It's got a higher protein. It's probably got a relatively low ADF value. And then energy values are higher, especially compared to forage B. And forage B is really low protein, which is 4.8%, and really low energy values as well. But here's forage C. It's got medium protein or relatively low protein, but it has a decent amount of energy compared to forage A. So which is the better forage? And I'm not going to say which is the better forage because I don't know what animal I'm feeding it to. And that's the example I want to get to. So let's take this cow that's 882 pounds. And I looked up on the beef recommendations in terms of what she needs. She's early pregnancy, so she's not going to have a high level of nutrient demand. And so from book values that we can look up, she's going to need about 13.5 pounds intake. So dry matter intake, which she needs about 0.8 pounds of crude protein, and she needs about 6.89 megacals of what we call net energy of maintenance. And you can use TDN here, you could use whatever. So if she's eating 13.4 pounds of that forage B, which is that low protein, was only 4.8% protein, she's really only going to get 0.64 pounds of protein, where she needs about 0.8 pounds protein. And if she eats that same feed, 13.4 times 0.41 megacals of energy, relatively low energy, she's only going to get 5.5 megacals of energy. So that feed B in that example is not going to meet her requirements, okay? So this feed would not be suitable for that animal. What about A or C? Well, if we look at forage C, okay, it was the middle quality, it was only 10% crude protein, but if she's going to be eating 13.4 pounds of that, she's going to get 1.43 pounds of crude protein. So she's easily meeting her crude protein needs. And if she's getting 0.58 megacals per pound of 13.4 pounds of feed, she's going to end up with 7.8 megacals of energy. So she's easily going to meet her energy requirements. So in this situation, you know, most people would have said forage A is better, but if you're feeding this animal, it's actually better to feed forage B, or excuse me, forage C. So why is that? Why is it that forage A would not be fed? Well, we need to go back and look at that again. Well, if we fed forage A this higher crude protein, she'd be overfed on protein, and she would actually have to spend energy to excrete that extra protein. So potentially she would lose the energy value of that feed because it's overfeeding protein. So what about using that same cow, but now she's nursing a calf? Her intake requirements and her protein and energy requirements go up drastically, a different stage of production. So if we look at forage C now, again, the same situation, she's going to easily meet her protein requirements with forage C, but she won't meet her energy requirements. So what does that mean? Well, if we look at that one more time, forage A and forage C don't have much difference in terms of their energy. But if we used forage A, again, we would overfeed protein. So again, even in this situation, forage C is probably the better feed because we won't be overfeeding energy, but we will have to probably supplement that cow in terms of some sort of grain concentrate to improve her energy intake to meet her nutrient needs to make the milk she needs to feed that calf. So here's another example, and this got sent to me by a farmer actually in Vermont, or actually in New Hampshire just recently, to say, I've got these two feeds, here's the analysis. What's the better feed to feed to some of my beef cows when I'm trying to finish them? So let's look at this, and I'm going to go through these just at the, there's lots of analysis on here, but I want to point out what I would look at immediately if I was trying to decide which is the better feed. So the first one I want to look at is crude protein. Okay, so this feed over here has a crude protein of 16.3, and we always look at what the feed analysis is on a dry matter basis. That's the only way to compare feeds, especially with stored feeds and silages, whatever. We need to look at it on a dry matter basis. So this feed is 16.3, this is 18.3. So again, that beef cow probably does not need all that much protein. But normally, if you were, looking at these feeds, you'd say, well, the higher crude protein is probably better. Maybe, maybe not. What's the second thing I would look at? Well, I'd look at those fiber values. I'd look at the ADF and the NDF values. In this situation, the ADF is 20.89. Again, ADF, cellulose, hemicellulose. We look at this side, the ADF value is 26.68. So the lower the ADF, the better the quality of the feed, the more digestible it's potentially going to be. So in this situation, the ADF is lower, so that would say this feed is better. What's the third thing I look at? Well, I look at sugars. Okay, so here we have a sugar content of 14.2.5 for simple sugars. If we look at the sugar content on this side, it's 8.4. So if I was saying, well, again, I'm trying to finish this animal, energy is my major concern, this feed would have more energy in the form of sugar, more rapidly fermentable carbohydrates. So this probably would be a good way to increase what we'd call the propionic acid concentration in that animal's rumen to increase weight gain. Another one I'd look at is this NDF digestibility. And you're going to see different values. On this side, you'll see we have different times. And really, we're looking at how quickly that NDF is digested at 12 hours, 30 hours, 120, or 240. So in this sample, we only have the 240, which is one that I normally use anyway. And we'll see that the digestibility of that NDF as a percentage of the NDF is 77.58. And on this side, it's 79.76. So not too much different. This one's maybe the NDF is a little bit more digestible. So maybe this one has a little bit higher intake. So we're going back and forth in terms of which one is the best at this point. The other thing I look at is this UNDF. Okay, and UNDF is the amount of NDF that's completely undigestible. And it's a prediction equation. We can actually measure it in a fecal matter if we wanted to, but it's a prediction equation. And this one is 7.85. And on this side, it's 8.40. So if we have less material that's undigested, it means that potentially we have a better utilization of the nutrient components of the NDF in this feed, although the NDF digestibility 240s aren't that much different. And finally, I also look at the ash content. So what is ash? Well, ash is the amount of mineral components. And normally, a forage should have an ash content of about 8%. Anything higher than 8 or 9% indicates that you've added some dirt, meaning that when you were raking that hay or when you were baling that hay, picking it up, you probably have some soil contamination. And this one is 8.86, this one's 10.35. So in this situation, I would say, you know, we've picked up a bunch of dirt, and I can guarantee you that most animals are not going to gain weight by eating dirt. So again, this one favors this side. So for me, I said that I would choose, if I was trying to finish a beef cow with this feed, I would probably choose this side, on the left-hand side. Protein's a little lower, but all the other components of that feed are equal or better than the feed that had the higher crude protein. Hopefully some of you agree with that and follow that conversation, but I know that that was a little bit intense. There are obviously lots of other components of these feeds that we'd want to talk about, but that would take a lot of time and you know, a lot more ability to try and figure out exactly how it's going to impact the feed value of that feed. And again, lots of this is being used for very complex dairy rations, but if you're a beef or sheep producer, you may not be using a lot of these components that get measured in a dairy forage analysis. So again, I'm just going to stop here pretty quick, but forage maturity, again, #1 factor. And we can really look at the analysis of a feed and look at the ADF and NDF values and really predict what the maturity is of that feed. We've always used crude protein in the past. I'd rather have you look at the ADF and NDF values to compare feed analysis and quality. And really, that NDF and NDF digestibility is key in terms of trying to get those animals to be able to eat more feed. And as they eat more feed, they're going to be more productive for you over time. So I think, Kimberly, I'm going to stop there right now. And I'm not sure if any questions have come in.
Yeah, we do have some questions. First, I'm going to go to the, there's a question on dry feed. So someone asked, they took 5 samples from various bales from 3 different cuts. And they want to know how would you go about choosing which bale to test, to take sample tests from? The ones that the cows like, or the ones they don't like, or a mixture?
Well, I guess it depends on your ability to feed them separately and also when you would be feeding them. So, you know, if you have a sheep herd and you're going to lamb your animals in March, you're going to try and figure out what's going to be their best quality feed to feed during that time period. So if you have some indication based just on physical parameters by looking at that hay, you know, is it leafy? Does it not have seed heads on it? Meaning it was harvested in a more immature stage. I would sample that. And if it's good quality, I would set it aside and save it for when those animals need it in a highest stage of their production cycle.
Okay. The other couple questions all kind of relate to this, dramatic change that happens with pasture, the quality dropping off in the, once the cool season grasses have hit their peak and then they drop off. So how do you keep that energy level high without grain? Can you do it by managing your pastures a little bit differently, or how do you meet that equation?
I mean, it really, it's a challenge. Obviously, those pastures are changing all the time. And so you need to balance how you graze, when you graze, trying to keep those pastures in a vegetative state, and also on a fairly equal state in terms of their stage of maturity. So clipping may have to come into play to try and do that. Harvesting some of that feed as stored feed. It is a challenge to try and keep those pastures in a productive state to maintain high levels of energy. And really, animals are going to do some of that and how they graze. So you can watch how they graze and see if they are selecting different plants, different ways they're going to consume that feed. And also look at them in terms of their room and fill. And again, I really like doing the pre-grazing clipping and measuring yield, and then do the post-grazing clipping and measuring yield, and see what they did actually eat. I think that's a key part of learning how to be a good grazing manager is to understand what gets eaten, what doesn't, and why. And then also saying, well, I've had 30 animals out here and their intake is actually relatively low. And sometimes you can actually visually see that on an animal. You can look at their rumen on the left-hand side, right behind their rumen. There's a triangular spot on a cow, and you can look and see how full did they get when they were out on the pasture. Is there a reason they're not consuming the feed? Is there a reason they didn't have room and fill? Those are all things that I would look at in terms of deciding whether the pasture is in a good stage for what they really need for nutrient requirements.
The other thing that often comes up for me, myself, in my own grazing, but also from people who I've worked with, farmers that I've worked with, is, it's kind of interesting how in some places on the same farm, you will have the same plants and animals will graze them very hard in one place, and then they won't graze them much at all in a different place. And do you have anything that you would attribute that to in particular?
That's a challenge. I really don't know. I mean, some of it can be, related to was manure deposited in certain places. Is there shade along one side, and maybe there's, some reason they're grazing in certain areas other than others. So I'm not quite sure. I don't think I have a good answer to that, Kimberly. I'm sorry to say.
Yeah, well, I don't know if anybody does. I've
Yeah.
been looking at that for years, and I have to say I haven't found anything yet. The only thing I keep coming back to is that, to look at the soil, what's coming up, what's in the soil, so that would be coming up in the plant maybe.
Yeah.
Another question, would you recommend rinsing off your sample to avoid dirt or ash in that sample?
I would not. I'd want to know that what the content is in that sample, and then, change my management next time around to make sure that I'm not picking up as much dirt. A lot of that dirt pickup can be related to how you take, or whether you ted your hay, you rake your hay, how the bale pickup fingers are picking up the feed, the type of rake you use, whether you have a rotary rake or you have a pinwheel rake. Pinwheel rakes are notorious for picking up lots of dirt, whereas as a rotary rake is much less susceptible to picking up dirt. And that's really more important, especially when you're doing silages. If you're doing round bale silage, dirt contamination in round bale silage is the primary reason we end up with potential for botulism in silage products. So it's really critical to minimize how much dirt, especially in silages, that gets picked up. So, think about that. If your ash content is high, think about, changing how you rake, changing the settings, maybe even mowing the field a little bit higher so you don't have to have that rake hitting the ground or the bale fingers picking up feed from off the ground.
Yes, and again, another question, if we're going to meet grass-fed protocols and we really need some energy, what are some of the things we can help to offset some of that high protein?
That's a challenge,
Yeah.
because usually the more digestible feed's going to have higher crude protein, and there's an expense of getting rid of that protein.
Yep.
So, there's not a real good answer to that. We always say, well, we should introduce more legumes into pastures to be able to fix more nitrogen, so we don't need as much, nitrogen fertilizers for the grass. But if we do that, we're going to increase the protein content we have to get rid of. And so it's a challenge. It really is. And so finding grasses that have high digestibility values, and looking that way is the way I would do it, and try and figure out what grasses are going to give you the better digestibility.
Yeah, it seems like going in that direction, that so often some of the ones that do have that do not have the longevity. They tend to, they're precious plants, I call them.
Well, it's like, perennial ryegrass is one that has a lot of digestible energy. And it just, we've done many trials. Sid's done a bunch of trials in Vermont. I've done them as well, trying to find varieties of perennial ryegrass that have a longer term life in Maine and Vermont, in terms of, are they going to be there in 3 years, or are we going to have to try and think about introducing other species? One that we look at a lot of times is meadow fescue, is another, more popular. It's the new hot grass in terms of people being excited about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great. Well, it looks like we have reviewed, we've kind of gone through all the questions.
Great.
Anything else you want to address, or any other last questions out there, folks?
I just want to make sure people understand when they, a lot of times, a lot of these calculations are based on dry matter. So you're always figuring out, if you're feeding wet feeds, if you're feeding silages, you need to make sure that you calculate back to dry matter. How much feed are you actually giving in terms of feed without the water involved? And so that calculation can get tricky for people sometimes. So I always say, when you look at trying to put something into a dry matter basis, you take the as fed weight and you multiply that percent dry matter. And if you're going back the other way, you're going to divide by the percent dry matter. So if you're always looking at trying to do these calculations, use the dry matter, not the moisture level. Use the dry matter and figure out what's the dry matter that you're consuming or feeding or whatever. So always use the percent dry matter in your calculations.
And there are tables, public, if you were to Google that, you could find that information. It's out there. It's on the internet.
Yeah.
Here's a question. Would drilling into your forage with like Sudan grass or something like that help add energy? And has anyone really done that very successfully?
So yes, you can drill in some plants that have high digestible energy. So, Sudan grass that has the BMR trait, which is the brown midrib trait, really improves forage digestibility and keeps protein low. So you can get a BMR pearl millet, you get a BMR sorghum Sudan, you can get a BMR sorghum. All those plants are great summer annuals to do just that, to increase the energy content without increasing the protein. The real issue is, can you just drill that into an existing sod and be successful? That I don't have a good answer for. I don't think you can do it all that easily. I've seen some cases where I've seen it work. You'd want to pick a stand that's relatively thin, fairly not very productive. And you probably need to pick the time when you do that. You want to make sure the soil is warm. You probably want to take your first cutting of hay off, or make sure you graze it really hard and then come through and drill in those warm season annuals. And again, I would look for the BMR trait. When I showed that picture early on of when I said it's all about intake with a cow with that was pearl millet they were consuming, and the millet was 4 or 5 feet tall. But again, that BMR trait in those warm season annuals really improves both intake and digestibility and energy content of the feed.
And I suppose you need to look at the cost, the expense of doing that, of actually running a tractor and running a drill and drill
Yep.
seeding that in.
Yeah. So broadcast seeding that on top is going to be absolutely a failure. It
Yep.
has to be drilled in, and it has to have little competition, if any.
Yep. Yeah. Well, so this is the pasture question of the 21st century is how do we answer this energy question?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Right.
great.
Well, good. Hi,
Thank
Megan.
you, everybody. Thank you. And if there are any other questions out there, you can put them in the Q&A. Even if you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and you're like, oh my God, I wish I'd asked Rick this question. He can answer them throughout the rest of the conference. So if you have new questions and they come up, we can get him to answer them.
Not at 3 o'clock in the morning, though.
No, not at 3 o'clock. I mean later, but if they want to do it. So that the Q&A stays open. You can also continue a conversation in the chat if you'd like. Our next session starts at 1:30, and that is with Deborah Nair and Nicole Masters. So see you all then. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.